Hello, Behzad. Thank you so much for being here. I saw that you started your company about a year and a half ago, and we want to get to what you're building. But first, I want to start with a quick introduction of what you've done before getting into the down the entrepreneurship path. So, what led to that? Tell me about yourself. Introduce yourself.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for having me. So I'll just give you a background about my general career, and that'll kind of tell the story of why I ended up here.
Sure.
My background is in pure math, and so I started there. And my plan was originally to continue in academia, but over time I saw that academia is becoming a little too bureaucratic, and becomes a lot about like filing grants and things like that. And I wanted to be part of something more active and real in a sense. And so I switched over to applied math and computer science. And from there, I went into data science. Um, Data science was always something that I loved, just in general, working with data, playing with data, trying to understand the world from a data perspective. So it was just a natural progression. I started my first job at a startup. I was, I guess, the 20th employee there. And I was a fairly small team, but to give a better context, I was probably the third or fourth data scientist at the team. And it was an AI startup. It's called MindBridge. And it was run by a very amazing CTO there who kind of understood what it means to build an AI product. And so I got my first, taste of work in a real environment where I really did get, a lesson in entrepreneurship there on its own. But I've always been, very close to like the real work that gets done. So I'm a technical person. And one of the things that I like is to kind of stay close to that. And at the same time, um, kind of have it be my own work, right? So like if I'm working on
Mhm.
something, I'm creating something, I want to have ownership over it. So these
Okay.
two things kind of are always in tension because mostly these days you'll see entrepreneurs who are coming from a more like business side of things. But for me, this has been kind of a tension. But so then from there, I went and I worked at a different startup, and I decided that I'm going to try my hand at entrepreneurship. And my idea was to basically do machine learning consulting. That was
Hmm.
back in 2018. Gave it a go with a couple of partners. We didn't end up selling as much as we would like, and so we shut it down. And then I went back to work at another startup, but much more mature, more like 100 people. And then from there, I went into a consulting firm. And I decided again that it was time for me to try it on my own. And so I jumped back out, and so now I'm running a machine learning consulting firm again.
That's awesome. And when if you started in academia, was it difficult to jump out of it? Was it a tough moral decision? Was there something else involved other than just the purely bureaucratic struggle that you were facing? Was there like other things on your mind?
Um, yeah, so I guess I'll answer two questions there.
Yeah.
Uh, so the first is to like whether it was difficult to jump through, and the
Hmm.
technical process of going specifically from pure math into industry was quite difficult because in pure math it's just pencil and paper, right? And so many companies, there's been eras in time where like companies will hire people out of math, knowing that they'll pick up whatever there is to learn very quickly. But then as those industries mature, so for example, actuary started this way, and even data science kind of started this way. But as the industry matures, what ends up happening is that specific programs get created for people. So now you have machine learning programs, data science programs, etc. And so it's a little bit tougher to jump at. Uh, but back in like let's say 2015, 16, where I started, it was a little bit easier because there was this concept that if you grab someone from the math side, they're going to learn the programming side of stuff fairly quickly. I did have
Okay.
an in between. I did a master's in applied math, computer science. So I had some coding background as well. But even then, like today, if I graduated from that same program, it would be more difficult to jump through. But to come back to your other question of like why I would have wanted to leave academia, it really was this sense of like, am I working on the problems that I'm here to work on, or am I spending time applying for grants? Am I spending time? Like, what does that future look like, right? And I think for that, like my decision was the right one because I had a lot of colleagues who were going through the PhD program at that time or that were just graduating. And so they were going into this postdoc position in pure math. And it just became like this kind of treadmill of just constantly chasing a sort of like mature career. And while that was constantly getting postponed. So you get like a
Mm,
postdoc, you get a second postdoc, you get teaching positions, etc. And so it just maybe it's just too much supply and not enough demand. But whatever it was, the format of academia had changed.
mm,
Um, and probably this is a concept that'll come up more as we talk.
yeah.
Uh, but this thing of what is the real value of work that we do versus the bureaucracy that develops around an institution.
Hmm.
That's been a big driving force in terms of like the decisions I make in life.
So now let's go into Tempered AI. Talk to us about what you're building, why you started it, and what are you trying to achieve?
Absolutely. So, Tempered AI is a consulting firm focused on Databricks. I
Hmm.
myself am a Databricks MVP, and I really like the platform of Databricks. I think it's a super useful tool. As a data scientist, when I started back in 2015 or so, we were building out every single bit of the process ourselves, right? So whether you're creating it like if you had a data warehouse, you're storing it yourself. If it was big data, you're storing it in S3, let's say, and you'd create the Parquet files yourselves. You don't have a meta layer on top of it. And if you want to do some kind of like workflow, you're gonna have to orchestrate it yourself. And so the entire process, there were so many different tools that we had to create. Versus now with let's say Databricks, everything's in one place, super easy to use, and they're all integrated. So it really allows me to kind of do my work. And so I figured why not do consulting on Databricks as this is the tool that I'm an expert in. And the other idea here is that, like I said, in my view of things, the keeping technical people close to the both business side and the technical side, I think there's value in that. I think that there's enough room in the market, or I'm hoping that this is going to be proven true over the long period of time, that there's enough room for different types of consulting firms, ones that are run by more business types and then ones that are run by more technical folks. And so the idea is that, we can have this kind of pluralistic sort of types of tech companies, some of them which are closer to the tech side, some of them which are closer to the business side. And I do think there's enough room for this. Most of the consulting firms that you'll find are going to be geared very much so on the business side of things. Of course, we deliver business value as well, but we come at it from a technical perspective, right? So we like to face the most difficult challenges, for example, that anyone is facing in Databricks. The consultants that are working with me also enjoy working on difficult problems. And so we have a kind of
Hmm.
environment that's different than the usual consulting firm, where we're more focused on the technical aspects of it and the delivery from that technical aspect uh, to kind of like where the focus and the decisions are being made at that level.
Okay, Behzad, that's actually very interesting because consultancy in general has kind of had a bad reputation over the years because a lot of people, like you said, from the business side of things, they they give you some not advice you can't really build on. It would be more something that would be nice in theory, nice to have. What if you did this? What if you did that? But I think what you're saying is that you work with people that know they have a problem, they have a technical bottleneck, and you have the expertise to solve it. Is
Correct.
is is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, yeah. And then, these are generally things that they can, over a longer period, deliver in-house as well. So the
Mhm.
reason why they engage with us is they're just saving time and it's opportunity cost, right? There's a higher chance of success and it's going to be faster, basically because we have done it before. And so that kind of brings a value to the team. So they're buying speed and a higher likelihood of success. And that's about it. Whereas, like for example, as you said, consultants have gotten a bad name because sometimes the end result ends up becoming a report, right? Or like the end result becomes a presentation where something is explained on how things should be done. But we don't have that. Um, we work on projects where it's like, okay, we need this delivery. Great, let's get that delivered. So that's kind of our focus, and I'm hoping that there's enough of a market for this type of consulting once we're growing big enough to, let's say, 50 or 500 consultants. I'm hoping that there's enough of a room for this type of a consultancy as well as we grow beyond those niche projects.
Mm, that's awesome. And do you think the market is mature enough today? Because you've kind of been ahead of the curve compared to the rest of the market because you've been in machine learning almost a decade ago,
Mhm.
and it really picked up with corporations a few years ago, when ChatGPT came up and people started experimenting. So do you think the market is mature enough to have these types of issues today?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think behind the scenes, things have been going on for a while. Obviously, with the chat models, they kind of captured our attention as a collective. I mean, even for myself, right? Like, I've been doing this, like you said, for the last 10 years, but only in the last 3 or 4 years was it kind of like a social phenomenon happen
Yeah.
as well. And there's definitely a lot of hype around it, and a lot of companies are looking to use Gen AI in some way inside of their infrastructure. But I would say that machine learning has been a part of the data science framework since the beginning, essentially. Like from a technical perspective, these algorithms are just data algorithms that have become more sophisticated over time and that take up more training data. But linear regression was already a type of machine learning algorithm, and these have been embedded in organizations for a very long time. Definitely now there's more urgency in companies, especially in the bigger corporations. You can see it that there's this urgency to adopt Gen AI all over the place, right? Like everything is getting transformed. It's kind of like the same kind of a moment where computers came in, and every company knew that they had to adopt computers, and so that sort of thing is happening again. So there's definitely maturity, specifically on the Databricks side. I also see that, almost every company is moving either to Databricks or Snowflake. Um, and, people who are already on Azure or AWS are trying to use those tools as much as they can. But usually it does end up people on Databricks or Snowflake. And so, there's this massive migration going on. So definitely there's a demand for it.
It's I really like the idea that you're positioning yourself in a way that when people want to get to the point where they want to implement AI, or let's just call it AI for now, you have the experience of implementing it in so many different places, and you've seen so many different corporate issues, because that's really the problem here. How can you scale something and make it reliable? Do you have issues? Did you face this in the market? People asking you, like, we have hundreds of employees, thousands of employees. How can we make sure to trust this? How can we make sure that this is going to be a reliable solution? Because people want AI, like you said, but they've been using a certain procedure for years or maybe decades. And now you're saying, how about we do it this or that way? Are you facing a bit of pushback? How do you feel the market is looking at this transformation, at this digital transformation today?
Yeah, so I think like we can break down the different personas and how they're perceiving it.
Hmm.
I think for most people who are on the using side of AI, what they're seeing is that there's a scary transformation, and they want to make sure that they have the tools. They want to be ready to use the tools that are coming in. And there's some pushback there. Some people will say, "Why do we have to adopt these new tools? Maybe we can continue the way we have been going." But I think that's more out of fear of the tools that are coming in. And most people, I think, are at this point adopting of a mantra that I first learned in my the first startup that I worked in, which was, you know, your job is not going to get taken over by AI, but by someone who's going to be using AI. So this has remained true over the last decade. Um, then there's the decision makers, the higher ups, and those people I think are facing a massive amount of urgency to adopt AI. Every board everywhere for the last 4 or 5 years has been saying AI. you know, it's just it's complete, right? Like everyone is saying the same thing. And then on the technical side of people who are actually developing these tools and putting them into the company who are close to the I think they have the most accurate picture, which is, it's not something to fear. It's also not magic. It's something that's going to come in and it's going to slowly transform how we do things. In the same way that, for example, when Microsoft Word was introduced or Excel was introduced and spreadsheets came in, like it changed things, but fundamentally it's the same people using a new tool. So breaking down those three personas, I've seen all three of those fairly commonly. You do get some people who kind of are exceptions to the rule. Like you'll have users who are like super excited, but generally people are a little bit cautious. You have decision makers that are skeptical, but generally they're very, very much feeling the urgency. And you have, technical people who sometimes are going to talk about AGI and how the singularity is coming, but generally speaking, they just see it as a new tool that's going to be adopted.
After a year and a half, what would you say, what was like one of the biggest lessons learned? Because I think you've joined many startups, but I think this is the first time that you own it
Mhm.
and you are the sole founders. Am I correct? You are
Yeah.
the sole founder. So what's the biggest lesson learned so far?
Yeah, so this is the second time I'm trying it, and it's kind of the same
Second time.
startup.
Yeah.
The lesson that I took from the first one was that channel
Mhm.
partnerships are going to be extremely important. And that's why I focused so much on the singular Databricks and saying, okay, you know what, we're going to focus on Databricks as technology. We have the technical expertise to service other platforms as well, but we're trying to focus on Databricks and we do the most investment into Databricks in order to develop that channel partnership. And what I'm finding more and more is that it's even more important than I thought, essentially to build that niche out and say, okay, we are specifically experts within Databricks, and we have the most expertise in, for example, fintech and retail and user analytics. And these are the three fields where we've developed the most tools. Um, and then to try and focus that into specific use cases as well. Because especially for us, because we're a technically minded company, um, it becomes a little bit harder to sell the message of these are the use cases. This is the exact ROI that you're getting, right? Because that becomes our blind spot. So to focus on that a bit more, I think has been the lesson, the ongoing lesson, let's say, over the last year.
Do you think that your math background helps you differentiate yourself in a field where everyone's trying to jump in today? Do you think that this gives you an edge?
It does, but after the fact. So going in, for example, like when we're reaching out to clients and we're doing these like cold emails or let's say cold reach out, etc., it doesn't make a difference. There's just so much noise that no one's hearing anything. But after that initial call, when we go in and we start discussing the technicals, and let's say the CTO is there on the other side, and they have some skepticism or they have some questions, and they've faced consultants in the past who came in and didn't deliver. Once we go into the details, coming in from this abstract technical perspective, it builds credibility fairly quickly. Yeah.
And so where do you see this going in a couple of years? What's the big picture? What's the dream here?
So the big picture for me is to grow the consultancy in a way that it can fund itself and continue to pay for itself. Of course, in a consulting firm, you're always going to have bench time. And in that bench time, there's a lot of product ideas that I have. And so
Hmm.
that's really the goal here is to focus on those product ideas. And with Databricks, you're getting some interesting tools now where you have Databricks apps and you already had brick builders where you can essentially develop products on top of Databricks. And so there's a lot of ideas that I have of how I would do this. So there's basically ready to use tools for enterprises. Um, in the same way that, for example, Azure had they have apps, etc. So
Hmm.
Databricks is going in this direction, and I want Temper to be a big part of that.
I mean, it's uh it's a good bet to work with something that's already established instead of trying to recreate the wheel. Because what we've seen in the past couple of years is people who tried to compete with giants and they just got eaten along the way when these giants started rolling out new features. So by working hand in hand and by being an expert at such a almost critical platform for machine learning, Databricks, uh, it's very interesting. And did you start building some of these tools, or are these just thoughts in your head today? You're just focused on the consultancy.
No, we've started building some of them out, but the focus right now is still growing the consultancy. But we've started already playing with some of it and using certain tools. One of the things that we've been working with a lot is recommendation engines, and we're
Mhm.
getting quite good at that with working with different clients. And the way we want to think about recommendation engines is to kind of make them more live and bring them into the newer formats of it, where you're essentially using vector indices, which is a part of large language models, to develop recommendation engines. And so this is something that I really want to develop much further and make a more mature product around.
And are you targeting any specific clients, or are you willing to help out anyone that has, um, you know, some difficulties implementing
Yeah, so
the tech?
so there's two different kinds of clients that we like. One
Mhm.
of the type of clients that we like is our typical mid-sized company that is doing a migration. They're trying to get the best machine learning standards in Databricks in the organization, or just generally working with data pipelines. We service the full stack of it, full service, whether it's data warehousing, data pipelines, etc. And so this is the bigger firm, and it's kind of like the bread and butter. But then there's also the more niche projects that we like to work on. So if you have something, if there's a company that has a really interesting problem, that will also grab our attention because like the me and the consultants that work with me are all nerds. We love really interesting problems. So, like if there's a smaller company and
Yeah.
they're just kind of like venturing into this, they can nerd snipe us if they have a really good, interesting problem. So those are the two things that we've seen.
I can see your happiness once you started describing a complex problem. So,
Exactly.
so you are a problem solver at heart, aren't you?
Exactly. That's right. Exactly. And the more complex the problem is, the more interesting it is for us.
Awesome. Behzad, there's so many people that have the ambition and the will to start their own companies. And a lot of them are scared because there's this lack of security that you get from a regular paycheck at a company. But at the same time, we hear about these stories of people that are starting businesses with just one or two employees and are doing really well. So in this age of AI, what would you tell young entrepreneurs that want to jump into this journey? What would you recommend, and how should they approach this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think even for myself, like let's say if I go back 10 years and I want to ask myself the same question, um, I think the question that I would put to them is whether they value working for themselves so much that they're willing to give up that security. Because the truth is, like when you're gonna jump out and you're going to do something on your own, there is less security in it, right? Thankfully, we live, for example, in Canada where the social safety net is very strong. So, if you fail, you just start over. But yeah, you might fall behind on life milestones with your peers. Like that will happen, right? Is that a risk you're willing to take? You might succeed, you might not. And the question shouldn't be based on the risk and reward kind of calculus. I think a better question to ask is kind of like, how much do you value working for yourself versus not? Like if working for yourself for let's say 2 years, but that means you earn less than you would have working somewhere else, would you still do it? Right? Like let's say you're earning 60% of what you can earn at a bigger firm. Would you want to live your life that way for the rest of your life? And I think everyone who's, for example, like an entrepreneur at heart will say yes to that because it's like, well, of course it's less money, but I'm working for myself. And there's so many good things about that, right? Versus if the path to entrepreneurship is like a path to money, I think
Yeah.
it might work, but it might also end up with a lot of heartache and disappointment, right? Like I heard this back in the day from my peers and stuff that who were trying to go into med school. They were hearing consistently that, if you're trying to make money, becoming a doctor is not like the path you should take, because it's not as much as you think at the end, and you might not make it, in which case you're going to have a lot of heartbreak. So I think something
Mm,
similar applies here. What is it, like 90% of startups fail, right? So
at least.
yeah, so it's kind of a question of like, because it's such a big risk, it should come with the passion to want to do things on your own, right? And I mean, I think that's a good way to put it. Is like, if you were to be paid, let's say 60% of your salary for the rest of your life, would you prefer to do it on your own? And if the answer is yes, then you go for entrepreneurship. And it might come with a bonus of making way more money, right? But if
Yeah.
that's the goal, I think that for most people, it's going to end up with a lot of heartbreak, and I wouldn't recommend it, because you're right. Like we get these, um, everything we see on social media is success, right? And so it's very easy to just kind of say, oh, okay, I'm gonna go do that and I'm gonna succeed. But if that's the goal, yeah, I think it's
Mm.
an end. So
Behzad, thank you so much for this conversation. This was really interesting. And really want to talk to you again in a couple of months or a couple of maybe a year down the line to see where you are from today. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you achieve all the goals that you have at Tempered AI.
thank you very much, and yeah, I would love to catch up again.
All right, awesome. See you.